In the last half of the 16th century, the walled cities of northern India, one by one, opened their gates to the invading armies of the Emperor Akbar, the descendant of Tamerlane and the terrible Genghis Khan. The besieged fortress sends its envoys out, while for miles around, the reverberations of the kettle drums proclaim Akbar's victory. For 50 years, the Mughal armies have campaigned in Hindustan, driving the Rajput princes before them and being defeated in turn. The subdued generals hold out their hands in submission, waiting for the emperor to give his orders. Gradually, Akbar united these medieval kingdoms into one country, extending from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. His land was many lands, and his subjects were of many different races and religions. After generations of war, the immemorial and tranquil life of the Indian countryside was resumed. Sacred cattle in their necklaces of gilded bells drank undisturbed at the door of Akbar's palace. The peace which he brought to the Rajput people was not based on oppression, but on tolerance and sympathy. The great emperor gathered his Hindu subjects around him and welcomed the most intelligent and vigorous at the Mughal court. Disregarding the Islamic law which forbids the making of images, he put talented Indians to work in the imperial studios, where they learned the Persian technique of miniature painting. Never stepping into the light themselves, they recorded the great events of the Mughal dynasty and its important personalities. No details of the painters' lives have been preserved, and no anecdotes are related about them. They stand in the background, coming forward only to present their albums of miniatures, on which they often collaborated. There were two schools of miniature painting in existence by the 17th century. The Mughal, which is the Mohammedan form of the art, and the Rajput, which is the Hindu form. Both of them tell us a great deal about medieval India. In his Red Palace at Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar carried on the affairs of his empire, ruling less as a military invader than as an Indian prince. Sitting cross-legged under a scarlet canopy of state, he received the diplomatic mission from his neighbor, the Sultan of Turkey. Prostrating himself, the ambassador touches his head to the ground before the emperor. Verses of salutation are declaimed, and the Sultan's gifts are presented, for the great must never be approached empty-handed. As Akbar replies, his words are taken down by a scribe, while an attendant stirs the hot air with a horsehair fan. Perhaps the Sultan's verses were a stately message of congratulation on the birth of Akbar's heir in 1569. As the joyous news spreads through the palace, the royal apartments in the harem fill with people. Princess Mariam Zamani lies in a pavilion and receives her friends, and a nurse lifts the baby up from his cradle for them to see. The child would be called Salim, in honor of a saint living nearby, who prophesied the emperor's prayers for a son would be fulfilled. Outside the enclosure, The horoscope of the young prince is being cast by a group of astrologers. They promise him a united land and a prosperous people when he comes to manhood. The shadow of God would shade his throne. That night, the women in the harem take part in a fireworks celebration. When Prince Salim ascended the throne, the hard work of building an empire had been done for him by Akbar. He took the name Jahangir and turned to a more leisurely way of life than his father had ever known. Poets and philosophers sat by his side and solemnly called him the adornment of the face of learning and insight. Scholars and bizarrely dressed Englishmen with curious information were called into the royal enclosure. Historians presented him with verse epics about his warlike ancestors, though he was not inclined to duplicate their exploits. Above all, Jahangir was interested in painting. His artists recorded the brilliant daily routine of his reign in all its picturesque and at times barbaric pageantry. We see the emperor at his window of appearance. When he speaks, the nobles lift up their hands and cry, "Wonder, wonder," to the crowd below. Some are there to petition, but many have come to satisfy themselves that the king is in good health and therefore in command. Among the faces, we see one of the Jesuit missionaries who were encouraged to visit and teach at court. Above Jahangir's head, there is even a picture of the Virgin Mary. In the personal atmosphere of the time, everyone was eager for some form of immortality. Jahangir's favorite courtiers were often rewarded by having their picture painted for the royal portrait albums. Sometimes the bejeweled forms of the emperors tell us little about them individually. Shah Jahan sits godlike on the peacock throne, so firmly in control not even the birds could fly without his permission.